Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 13 stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Of course, only drop a like if you genuinely enjoy the video. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Seriously, we have a lot of content on the way. Subscribe, please! Also, really quick, I decided to use one of my older microphones for this video. I'm using my RE20. I get a lot of comments from people saying that they miss like how my audio used to sound. And I think what they mean is they miss when I was using a dynamic mic, because I used to use dynamic mics like almost exclusively. I'm just talking about some nerdy stuff, but I'm using my old RE20 for this video. If you enjoyed this audio more, let me know. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. For context, I'm a 23-year-old history student at college in a small town in the United States. I love learning about history, specifically wars. My grandfather passed away recently after a long battle with stage 4 leukemia. He and I were very close. He would tell me stories about his combat experiences in Vietnam. A few days later, I received a package from his estate. Dear Mr. Thompson, enclosed are a few items your grandfather wanted you to have. I opened the package to reveal a leather-bound journal and a World War I era dog tag. I opened the letter accompanying the items. Jack, this is something I never told you for your own good. Grandpa. I took a deep breath and opened the journal. Journal of Private James Holden, 2nd Battalion, Western Front. October 5th, 1917. They say the war will end soon. I've heard that lie before, but I write it here for the sake of hope. The trench is the same as always, mud up to our knees, rats growing fat on the dead, and the constant stench of decay. Tonight the fog rolled in thicker than I've ever seen. Corporal Davies swears he saw something moving out in no man's land. We laughed it off, but he wouldn't let it go. I don't blame him. The silence feels wrong. Even the guns seem hesitant. October 16th, 1917. Something happened. I can hardly hold the pen. My hands are shaking so badly. Willoughby, young lad, barely out of training, vanished during the night. He was on watch with me when he suddenly dropped his rifle and climbed out of the trench. He said nothing, just disappeared into the fog. We called after him, but he didn't respond. Hours later, he came back. Only it wasn't him. Not really. His uniform was torn, and his skin was gray as ash. When he smiled, it wasn't a man's smile. It was too wide, too unnatural. We shot him. God help us, we had no choice. But even after the bullets, he kept moving. It took a bayonet through the chest to stop him. We buried him just before dawn. No prayers, no ceremony. None of us could look at the grave for long. October 19th, 1917. The whispers started last night. I thought it was the wind at first, but no, it's voices. Davies claims they're speaking to him, calling his name. He says he can hear his mother's voice, telling him to come home. I told him it's the war playing tricks, but I'm not so sure. I heard something too. My sister, Mary, who died years ago. The men are on edge. Some won't speak. Others won't sleep. I fear what tonight will bring. October 24th, 1917. We are cursed. There's no other word for it. Davies tried to leave. We found him at the edge of the trench, staring into the fog. He fought us when we pulled him back, screaming about the light and the voices. It took 3 of us to restrain him. By morning he was dead. His body was cold as ice. His skin pale as death itself. We buried him next to Willoughby. The whispers grow louder. I swear I saw shapes moving in the mist, but every time I look, they vanished. October 29th, 1917. Another one gone. Pritchard this time. He walked into the fog like Willoughby did. When we found his body, it was covered in frost. The whispers are constant now. They call my name. They laugh. I dreamt of my family last night. They were standing in no man's land, their faces twisted into horrible smiles. I woke up screaming. The fog doesn't lift anymore. Day and night it surrounds us. I've stopped counting how many men we've lost. October 30th, 1917. No one is left. Only me. The trench is silent, save for the whispers. They're louder than ever, and now they're inside my head. I see the faces of the men who died, their hollow eyes watching me from the mist. I don't know how long I can hold out. My hands are numb. My breath fogs in the air. The cold seeps into my bones. They're calling me. I think I'll go. I closed the journal, my eyes dilated and breathing rapid as my heart nearly burst from my chest. It shouldn't have been possible. It didn't make any sense. I made my way to the window to look outside. There was a heavy fog rolling in, usual for this time of year. My eyes looked around, then widened when I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was Grandpa, standing there in his combat uniform with a too wide smile on his face. His skin was gray and he was mouthing something. I could just barely make it out through the fog. Join me. It started with a simple question. Mommy, can imaginary friends be real? I glanced up from my laptop. My 7-year-old daughter Lily stood in the doorway of my home office, clutching her stuffed bunny. I smiled. Of course not, sweetheart. That's why they're called imaginary. Her lips pursed. But what if they know things? I frowned. What kind of things? Lily shrugged, her gaze darting away. Just stuff. Never mind. She shuffled out before I could press further. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Kids have wild imaginations, right? But then, the accidents started happening. The first time it was a fire at our neighbor's house. The night before, Lily came to me looking pale. Mommy, Olivia says Mrs. Carter's house is going to burn down. I paused mid-sip of my coffee. Who's Olivia? My friend, Lily said simply, as if that explained everything. She's your imaginary friend? I asked, smiling. Lily hesitated, then nodded. She doesn't like being called imaginary. Right, I said, humoring her. Why does Olivia think Mrs. Carter's house will burn down? She just knows, Lily said. She knows lots of stuff. I reassured Lily it was just her imagination, but the next morning, sirens blared down our street. Flames consumed the Carter house, black smoke billowing into the sky. Luckily, Mrs. Carter was unharmed. She'd gone out for groceries minutes before the fire started. When Lily heard, she didn't seem surprised. I told you, she whispered. 2 weeks later, Lily mentioned Olivia again. Mommy, Olivia says to stay away from the bridge tomorrow. I froze. Why? She says it's going to fall. My stomach nodded. The bridge was part of my daily commute. Lily, that's not funny. I'm not joking, she said earnestly. Please don't go. Against my better judgment, I worked from home the next day. Around noon, I got a news alert. Massive bridge collapse leaves 5 dead, dozens injured. I stared at my phone, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. The bridge Lily warned me about had collapsed during the morning rush hour. If I'd ignored her, I might have been on it. When I confronted her, she just shrugged. Olivia told me. Who is Olivia? I demanded. She's my friend, Lily said, her voice trembling. She says bad things are going to keep happening. From then on, Olivia's predictions became a regular occurrence. A car crash at an intersection, a storm that uprooted trees, a freak accident at the grocery store. Every time Lily would relay Olivia's warnings, and every time I brushed them off until they came true. I tried everything to understand. Was Lily hearing things, seeing something I couldn't? I even took her to a therapist who chalked it up to coincidence and a vivid imagination, but it didn't feel like coincidence. One night I decided to push. Lily, what does Olivia look like? She's pretty, Lily said softly, but her eyes are black, like the night. The hair on my arm stood up. Where does Olivia live? I asked. Lily pointed to her closet. I laughed nervously. In your closet? She doesn't live there, Lily clarified, but that's where she comes from. That night, I locked Lily's closet door. A few days ago, Lily came to me crying. Olivia says you're in danger. I felt it chill. From what? She won't say, Lily sobbed, but she's scared. The last time Olivia predicted danger, it saved my life. So I started taking precautions. I stayed home, avoided sharp objects, and double-checked every lock. Nothing happened. Then yesterday, Lily's room went cold. I was tucking her in when she whispered, She's here. Who's here? Olivia, Lily said, her voice shaking. She says it's too late. The lights flickered. I spun toward the closet. The locked door creaked open, though I hadn't touched it. Mommy? Lily's voice was barely audible. Something stepped out of the shadows. I don't know how to describe it. Long limbs, skin stretched too tight, and eyes like endless voids. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could explain. Leave her alone, I screamed, throwing myself in front of Lily. The thing tilted its head as if studying me. Then it smiled, an impossibly wide, jagged grin. You can't stop what's coming, it whispered, its voice a rasp that chilled me to the bone. And then it was gone. Now Lily won't speak. She just sits in her room staring at the closet door. She won't eat, won't sleep, and flinches whenever I get too close. The worst part? I've started hearing things. Soft whispers at night, scratching from inside the walls. Last night I woke up to find Lily standing over me, her eyes unfocused. Olivia says it's your turn, she whispered. I don't know what's happening, but I'm scared. Whatever Olivia is, she's not imaginary. She's real, and she's not done with us. Attention, the library will be closing in 15 minutes. The voice coming from the building speaker startled me a few hours into my uninterrupted studying in the library's silent area. I glanced at the clock on the wall, only to realize that hours of screen time had made me lightheaded and caused everything over 2 feet away from me to look blurry. Regardless of the library closing, I took this as a sign that I should probably wrap it up for the night. Besides, after snapping out of focus, I noticed the airflow in the library had at some point shut off, ending the comforting hum of the vents above. I liked the silence of the library, but without the vents running, it was almost too quiet. I packed up my computer and notepad, trying not to disturb the other sleep-deprived students around me. I had been studying in this same area nearly every Friday since the beginning of the semester, and it was clearly becoming more popular as midterms approached. Even I found myself staying later and later each week. It was easy to focus there, and I wish I had spent more time there during my first year. As I wandered towards the main doors of the library, I smiled to myself when I saw a committed gathering of students in one of the dimly lit conference rooms. Clearly engrossed in whatever they were studying, and likely to stay there until security threatened to carry them out. I wasn't feeling great about the next day's differential equations midterm, but historical class averages for Math 235 told me that was a common student experience. When I received my midterm grade the following week, I realized I should have been a little more worried. Sure, a 68% average isn't great, but the bright red 33 out of 60 scrawled under my name on the return test was considerably worse. How'd you do? I looked up at Harrison's curious expression, his tone telling me that he didn't do so well either. Not great. You? I responded, offering my test in exchange for his. He silently handed his over, and I felt a bit better after reading his 31 out of 60. Well, at least neither of us failed. Considering that I still don't even know what question 3 was asking, I'd say that's pretty good. I laughed at Harrison's optimism as I handed his test back. I didn't love this class, but at least I had someone to struggle through it with. As we gathered our things and left the lecture hall, I asked what he'd been up to this weekend. Just catching up on work. I might try to go to that mid-semester club night I keep hearing about on Saturday, but tickets are so expensive I can't decide if it'll be worth it. You? Same. Too much going on to do anything interesting. Ain't that the truth? Well, enjoy what you can. And for what it's worth, have a good weekend, Eliza. With that, he zipped up his coat and headed out into the chilly fall air. I gave him a mock salute and headed out in the opposite direction, taking a detour to Timmy's before heading to the library. Attention, the library will be closing in 15 minutes. For the second Friday in a row, the voice startled me out of my study stupor. I was sure I'd get used to it as my late nights continued, especially since my current grades were motivating me to really pick it up before finals. Once again, I noticed the eeriness of the completely silent study room and absent-mindedly wondered when exactly the vents turned off. I figured it was a good thing that I was so focused on my work that I completely tuned out my surroundings, trying to shake off my screen-induced dizziness. I started to exit the library, looking for a garbage bin to toss out my long empty Tim's cup on my way out. I spotted one around the corner from the water fountain, right outside one of the occupied conference rooms. As I made my way over, I recognized the group of students I had been huddled around the room's table the previous week. Throwing out my garbage, I realized they were considerably older than me, closer to the age I'd expect most professors or possibly mature PhD students to be. I guess I had just assumed everyone in the building past 11 p.m. would be undergraduates fighting for their academic lives. I saw through the glass walls of the conference room that all 3 windows were open, and I wondered how the room could still feel too hot at the end of October. Glancing at the room's booking schedule, I saw that it was reserved every Friday from 10 p.m. to midnight for Anonymous. Hey, can I help you? I jumped, turning to look at the demanding voice behind me. It had come from a middle-aged man who I hadn't noticed walking up behind me. Man, was he quiet. Oh, I was just reading the room schedule. I started to walk away from the door when I heard him again. What's your name? He commanded. I didn't appreciate his question. It was dark out. He was at least 6 feet tall, definitely looked stronger than me, and I was well aware of how dangerous campus can be to young female students at night. I don't need to tell you that, I retorted, barely turning around to face him. "If you're going to peer into my group's private session, I want to know your name," he snarled. At this point, I was starting to get annoyed. "Dude, this library is open to the entire university. If you want somewhere private, go somewhere else. I was literally just reading the schedule." I could see him starting to reply, but I turned and put my headphones on before he could say anything. Some people think they're so important. The next Friday, I found myself squinting at the clock multiple times before 11:30 p.m. I cursed previous generations for developing technology. I'm sure I wouldn't feel so dizzy and nauseous if I could study from regular paper every day, instead of staring at a computer. I had finished all my midterms for the semester, but I needed to make sure I didn't fall behind over the next month and a half before finals. So I turned to Google in search of quick remedies for dizziness and nausea. I rolled my eyes at the typical fear-mongering that greeted me on the first website I clicked on. I scrolled past multiple links warning me about the increase in patients suffering from coronary artery disease in Canada, and number of surgeries for CAD seeing exponential growth, and saw recommendations for various prescriptions. I figured it would be too much trouble to get a prescription, and besides, I wouldn't even get the pills for another few weeks. So I settled on stopping to fill up my water bottle on my way out. I sighed when I remembered the most convenient water fountain was located right by Mr. What's-Your-Name's booked room. But I needed water, and as I had told him the week before, the library doesn't belong to him. Also, I might be able to avoid him seeing me, as the fountain was around the corner from the glass doors of the room. I left my study area right at past, noticing a couple of the sparse students around me rubbing their eyes or laying down on their desks for a break, and headed in the direction of the conference room. I bent over to take my water bottle out of my backpack and felt a rush of lightheadedness. Taking a deep breath, I took a moment to close my eyes and lean against the wall beside the water fountain. I could hear hushed voices traveling through the wall from the group inside. "System, blockages, transmitted." My head felt better and my vision was no longer blurry, but hearing those few words made me curious about whatever Mr. What's-Your-Name was being so pretentious about. I admit, our encounter was still annoying me, so I figured a bit of eavesdropping could be my way of secretly getting back at him. I turned my head and laid my ear directly against the wall. Increasing subject, cabbage, implantation, high recovery rate. Cabbage? Were they studying gardens? I pressed my head harder into the wall, wondering what kind of gardening meeting would be such a secret. Continued artery, under radar, donor. This voice was quieter, and while I could make out less words, what I did hear was enough to confuse me further. Arteries had no place in gardening, I would think. Then again, I figured this could easily be some sort of animal testing study. The voices went quiet, so I decided to give up my efforts and finally fill up my water. I really hoped hydration was the issue. I did not want to deal with health problems in the middle of my second year. "Eliza, can you grab me a Gatorade while you're at it?" I nodded at Harrison as I stood up to go to the vending machine. He didn't usually like to study on campus after class, especially in the middle of the week, but this week's Math 235 assignment was kicking our butts. So we decided to work on it together in the collaborative zone in the basement of the library. As the time went on, I started to ask myself why I ever thought it was a good idea to become a physics major. "Here you go." I tossed Harrison his Gatorade and cracked open my Coke Zero. "Are you sure you want caffeine this late at night?" he asked. "Yeah, I mean, I'm so tired these days, it's not like it's going to keep me up. If it can help me get this assignment done tonight, that's all I care about." I rubbed my temples, staring at the equations on my screen as if doing so would make them solve themselves. "I feel you. Leave it to uni to drain us of our lives and our health. lamented Harrison. I smiled in agreement. Returning to my work, I heard the vents slowly dwindle off. "Oh, that's weird," said Harrison, looking up at the ceiling. "I thought it was quiet before, but you're right. When the air shuts off, you really feel isolated in here." "Yeah, it's especially weird in the silent rooms, or when no one else is around. Speaking of, I'm surprised we're the only people stuck in here on a Wednesday night." "Well, I guess most people are either smarter than us, or just have better things to do." "What time is it?" He checked his watch. 10 p.m. Huh. That reminds me of something I meant to tell you about earlier. There's this group of, I don't know, professors or something that reserves one of the upstairs conference rooms every Friday from 10 p.m. until the library closes. I tried to listen to their conversation last week, and it sounds like they're researching animal testing. Harrison frowned. "That's odd. Shouldn't they have labs or offices for that? Maybe they don't want to be too public by creating a dedicated space for that because of controversies or whatever." "What did the room booking say?" "Anonymous, which makes sense if they're wanting to keep that type of thing under wraps. Pretty sure all you need to do to book a room is enter an email on a library website. Still, why so late at night?" "They probably drink too many Coke Zeros during the day." I threw my pencil at Harrison, and he dodged it, laughing. I started to laugh with him, wincing as I felt the world start to sway around me and my chest tighten. Harrison noticed. "Eliza, are you okay?" Yeah, I'm fine. Just the same stuff I was telling you about earlier. It's probably a migraine or something. Seems to get worse if I get worked up or excited. I'll be fine." Harrison still looked concerned, but I promised it was no big deal. We returned to our assignment and kept working for another hour. 2 days later, I found myself struggling to get through any work during my usual nighttime silent study, despite being fully stocked with water, electrolytes, and anti-nausea medication. The dizziness and chest pain hadn't fully gone away since my study session with Harrison, and it seemed to be getting worse as I continued to force myself to study. I knew I needed to go home and sleep. Maybe I would call my parents in the morning and see if they had any advice. I headed out of the study area, deciding that I would see if I could eavesdrop any more on the conference room group. At least then I would have something to tell Harrison about, and my library visit wouldn't be a total waste of time. As I casually headed in that direction, I saw that the door was partially open. Perfect. I could feel cool air as I walked towards the water fountain, and I once again wondered how they could possibly be too warm at this time of year. I glanced around for bystanders, before standing as close to the corner of the wall as I could, holding my breath and trying to ignore my blurry vision and aching chest. I extended a keen ear and heard two voices. "We're being noticed. Have you seen the headlines this week?" I recognized the first voice. It was Mr. What's-Your-Name. "Yeah, and increasing cases of artery disease is not exactly new in North America." The second voice was clearly a woman, her tone condescending. "It is at this rate. I say we slow down our toxin influx. Just for now." A third voice chimed in. "If we slow it down, it's not a for now, it's a for good. Do you think it's easy to gain access to multiple building ventilation systems without public notice, even just in one province? Even with our funding, I don't think I can swing it again if we don't continue producing patients at our current rate. We have access for the next month, and if our output doesn't keep up, they won't renew our contract." The first voice piped in again as I felt my chest pain sharpen. I figured I should really go home, but was so intrigued by what I was hearing, and I doubted I would get better any faster there anyways. I tuned back in and kept listening. "Operate on each patient under our agreement, but I'm not confident that we're going unnoticed. Speaking of output, are there any updates for the post-surgery results? Have the devices been recognized yet?" He was answered by yet another voice. So far, no. Over the past month, we've received 4 positive health signals from our transmitters, all from patients who had been operated on within the past 3.5 months. My estimation of 3 months was generally correct for the transmitter's in vivo data collection. It's fighting the toxin as expected, and all 4 patients passed every screening as predicted by the transmitter. Our outcome was at least 90% of our anticipated value in all cases, with the quality of harvested organs meeting or exceeding our expectations, and autopsy results showed little negative side effects from the transmitter. I heard the woman speak again. See, if our donor output continues to be this successful, we'll be okay with the rise in cases making the news. I'm sure we'll continue to receive funding and possibly extra protection if this keeps up. They won't allow the public image of our healthcare system to turn. Continue the ventilation pump, surgery intake, and transmitter distribution as normal. Now, can you bring up the autopsy results? My heart was racing, trying to figure out everything I had heard. I wiped my hands on my jeans, suddenly noticing how clammy they were. Toxins, artery disease, surgery. I suddenly remembered seeing some of those exact words on the healthcare websites I saw earlier this week. Fighting my now debilitating chest pain and nausea, I stumbled away from the room. Too late. I realized I probably shouldn't have crossed in front of the glass wall, but I was trying so hard to stay upright that I wasn't thinking straight. As I was halfway across the width of the glass wall, I heard the voices go silent and the door shut. I prayed that they didn't see me. When I finally made it out of the library, I failed to see the icy sidewalk through the darkness and my failing vision. I slipped and felt my head hit the ground with a loud thud. I came to my senses amongst voices and sirens, feeling something covering on my mouth. The women I realized to be paramedics sitting on either side of me were exchanging words I didn't understand. As I slowly started to try and sit up, the paramedics to my left gently pushed my shoulder back onto the stretcher. Hey, it's okay. Don't get up. The name on your ID was Eliza. Is that the name you prefer? I nodded. Okay, Eliza. Hang in there. Do you remember what happened? I squinted, trying but failing to remember the past few hours. Someone found you on the ground outside the library. You had a heart attack, which likely also caused your fall. Try to stay calm and breathe. We'll be at the hospital soon. A couple hours and multiple intake steps later, I sat in a hospital bed waiting to see the doctor. I couldn't wrap my head around what just happened. A heart attack? How? I'm 20 years old. I rubbed my chest, the debilitating pain gone but a dull throbbing remaining. I was also slowly remembering what I had heard in the library. I still couldn't fully put together what they were talking about, but what I did hear did not make me feel safe in the hospital. I was struggling to piece it together while fighting my lasting headache when I heard the door open. Knock knock. Hi Eliza, it's Nurse Jennifer. I wanted to give you the heads up that our on-call cardiovascular surgeon, Dr. Eberson, will be in shortly. Are you doing all right? The answer was no, but I nodded anyways. She smiled and left the room, telling me to let her know if anything changed. About 10 minutes later, I heard a knock on the door. Eliza? The door opened. I'm Dr. Eberson. I was expecting to see you here after seeing the state you were in leaving the library earlier. No, it couldn't be. I looked up to see Mr. What's-Your-Name. The shock probably showed in my face, as he smirked and gave a small chuckle. I opened my mouth to speak, but I didn't know where to start. Dr. Eberson continued, looking down at his chart. It looks like you suffered a small heart attack due to blocked arteries. We'll be performing a coronary artery bypass grafting on you, which should resolve the problem. After the surgery, it is vital that you stay in good health through diet and exercise to prevent this issue from happening again. Do you understand? I managed to get my voice back. No. Excuse me? No, I don't want the surgery. I don't consent. Dr. Eberson looked briefly annoyed. That isn't an option. You need this surgery or your next heart attack could be fatal. I know you don't want that. He paused, his expression hardening. And don't pull that consent BS on me. You and I both know that your idea of bodily autonomy is worthless. He was right. I stared at my hands, feeling entirely defeated. I still didn't understand what I had heard earlier, but I heard enough to know that whatever they were discussing, it had something to do with patients in the healthcare system. I couldn't trust anyone in this hospital to help me. I was completely powerless. Good. You'll be having the surgery later today. And Eliza, he said, prompting me to look up. Whatever you heard, or whatever you think you heard, remember, the people making these decisions are experts in what they do and why they do it. It may seem like a big deal to you, but some things are done for the greater good. He left, closing the door behind him. I felt all my hope leave the room with him. It has been just over 4 months since my surgery. I feel like my body isn't my own. There's something foreign about it now. Every part of me wants to fix it, but if there's one thing I do know, it's that I cannot go see a doctor. Who could I go to? The conversation I heard in the library that day constantly rings through my head, and I wonder what part I now unwillingly play in their plan. However, I have managed to gain back some control in my life. As it turns out, 1,000 calories per day, 1 to 2 hours of cardio daily, and splurging every weekend with a fifth of vodka is enough to keep me barely alive. Positive health signals were received at 3 months, said the voice in the room. Staying healthy is vital, said Dr. Eberson. As long as I can remember those words, I will continue to do the opposite. It seems to have worked so far. Sometimes I still visit the library, and I worry every time I see a student rub their eyes. The newborn phase is hard. Most parents will tell you hard is an understatement. In reality, you spend most of your time dirty and delirious, desperately trying to avoid nodding off into your third or fourth morning cup of coffee. You're already dealing with constant worry, inconsolable screaming, endless poopy diapers, and wondering what each stain on your shirt is. You have no hope of getting a full night's sleep. You hardly have time to eat, let alone cook. A shower suddenly becomes the height of luxury. What I'm trying to get at is, it's easy to believe your mind may be playing tricks on you when you see something in the shadows in the dead of night, when you have a newborn. But this isn't my imagination, and I need to know if any other new parents have seen this too. Well before my due date, we set up the baby monitor. We left the monitor on at night in order to get used to the screen's persistent glow cutting through the darkness of our room. I'm a night owl, frequently staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, so I spent many nights glancing at the screen and never noticed anything unusual. The same was true for the first few months of my daughter's life while she slept in the bassinet beside our bed. But on her first night alone in her room, I noticed a particularly dark spot in the corner that seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, as if it were breathing. I squinted, I zoomed the camera in. I even went into the room and peeked at the corner myself. I didn't find anything out of the ordinary until I glanced back down at the screen and saw that the spot had moved from the corner to the middle of the room and now a distinct humanoid silhouette, and it was looking in my direction. Fear engulfed me immediately. I stared at the figure on the screen as it stared at me. I had trouble tearing my eyes away, frozen in terror, but I knew I had to look up. I had to see it for myself. But when I looked up, nothing was there. I rushed over and scooped up my daughter, bringing her back to her bassinet in our room, and when I looked back at the monitor as I plugged it in, I noticed the figure was gone. What was still lingering was the chill that had been sent up my spine, and an unshakable feeling that I was being watched. I spent the rest of the night staring at the door, as if I was waiting for someone to come barging through it. It was a week before my husband could convince me to let our daughter sleep in her room again. "You're tired. You're stressed. You probably just saw a shadow," he kept repeating. I finally gave in, just to make him drop it. I spent the entire night sitting up in bed, eyes glued to the monitor, scanning constantly for pulsating shadows, but none showed up. After a few nights with no overnight visitors, I began to relax. After a few weeks, I started to believe that my husband must have been right. It must have been a figment of my imagination, but last night I rolled over to take one last peek before going to sleep for the night, expecting to see my daughter sleeping in her crib, but she wasn't in her crib at all. She wasn't even in the room. The shadow was standing right over her empty cot, its head snapped up in the direction of the camera, as if this thing was trying to look into it, to look at me. I immediately smacked my husband awake and shoved the monitor in front of his face. "Where's the baby?" I yelled as he rubbed his eyes, trying to come quickly back to consciousness. "What are you talking about?" He yawned, finally focusing on the monitor, eyes suddenly going wide and moving to scan my undoubtedly unhinged expression. "What's that thing?" he asked me, not waiting for the answer as he sprung out of bed, running into her room as I scanned every corner of ours. As if she could have magically teleported in here on her own. I didn't see her anywhere, so I followed my husband, hesitantly for some reason, and made my way to the nursery doorway, monitor in hand. On it, I could see my husband frantically searching high and low in the room, but more importantly, I could see the figure looming over his each and every move, reaching out, trying to touch him, when my husband suddenly whipped around, panting as if he expected someone to be there and yet saw nothing. But I could see it. From the doorway, I glanced up at them, but instead of seeing my husband, I was met with the face of the thing, inches from my own, with deep black eyes staring into my soul itself. The skin was covered in boils so full they could burst at any moment. Giant, jagged yellow teeth leaked drool over stretched, cracked lips. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It opened its mouth and I expected my ears to be met with a disgusting gurgling, but instead, a sweeping crescendo of infant cries engulfed me. Not just one infant, but many, all screeching in perfect harmony, transfixing me with their heart-shattering sounds. The screams became an all-encompassing roar, growing louder and louder, before suddenly stopping altogether, the beast vanishing right before my eyes. I then heard a quieter, familiar cry from my daughter's crib. She lay there, squirming a bit, beginning to fuss, and my husband and I exchanged confused looks before he picked her up and brought her back to our room. I don't think I'll ever be letting her sleep in that room again. The thing that's really bothering me, though, is that something feels just the slightest bit off about my daughter, like she's changed in some way. Has anyone ever encountered a monster like this? I've always had this subtle unease around mirrors. Not enough to call it a fear, just a feeling, like they were showing me a little more than I wanted to see. I never thought much of it until last month, after my roommate Evan went missing. Evan and I weren't best friends or anything, but he was a good guy, reliable, the kind of person you'd notice missing right away because he was always there. In the kitchen making tea, playing music in his room, calling out, "You need anything?" whenever he went to the store. One morning, he was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. He'd mentioned being stressed with work and needing some space, but then hours turned into days. His bed was made. His keys, wallet, and phone were still on the counter. Even the mug of tea he'd brewed the night before was sitting cold and untouched in the sink. The police came, asked their questions, and left without much to say. People leave. the officer said, shrugging like it was the most normal thing in the world. Sometimes there's no reason. But Evan wouldn't have left. Not like that. For the first week, the apartment felt unbearable. It wasn't just the silence, it was the emptiness. Without Evan's presence, the place felt massive and hollow, like a space too big for me alone. I started leaving lights on in every room, the TV playing softly in the background. It helped, at least until I noticed the mirror. There's this little mirror in the hallway, cheap and barely big enough to check your hair in. I'd walked past it 1,000 times without ever noticing it, but one night I glanced at it as I walked by and saw something that stopped me cold. My reflection didn't move. I turned my head toward the living room, but my reflection stayed perfectly still, staring straight ahead. It was just a split second, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I stopped, turned back, and leaned in closer. My reflection stared back, moving as it should, every detail perfectly normal. I laughed at myself, brushing it off as exhaustion or maybe some trick of the light, but I couldn't shake it. The next time it happened, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I looked up at the mirror and my reflection smiled at me. I wasn't smiling. The grin was wide and wrong, stretching just a little too far. My heart jumped into my throat. I dropped the toothbrush, stumbled back, and when I looked again, everything was fine. Normal. Just my tired face staring back at me. That's when I started seeing it everywhere. Windows, darkened TV screens, even the surface of a mug when the light hit it just right. I'd catch flashes of myself smiling when I wasn't, tilting my head when I was perfectly still. And then the dream started. Almost every night I'd see Evan. He'd be sitting on the couch in the living room, his back to me. His head would tilt slightly to the side as if he were listening to something just out of reach. "Evan?" I'd whisper, though my throat always felt tight and dry in the dream. He would turn slowly, and I'd wish he hadn't. It looked like Evan, but his face was off. His skin was too pale. His features stretched like they'd been pulled too tight over his skull. His eyes were the worst, empty and wide, staring at me without really seeing me. "They're watching," he said one night, his voice flat and hollow. "Through the glass. Don't trust what you see." I woke up drenched in sweat, his voice still echoing in my ears. After that, I couldn't handle the mirrors anymore. I threw blankets and towels over all of them, anything to keep from seeing my own face, but it didn't help. I'd still catch glimpses out of the corner of my eye, reflections where they shouldn't have been, always watching. A few nights ago, I found a note tucked under my bedroom door. "Stop looking. It's not you." It was written in my handwriting. That night, I heard noises coming from Evan's room. It started as soft scratching, like nails on wood, and grew louder until it sounded like something was being dragged across the walls. "Evan?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. The scratching stopped. Then came the tapping, slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. It sent shivers through me, but I couldn't stop myself. I crossed the hall to his door and pressed my ear to it. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, until it sounded like fists pounding on the walls. I yanked the door open and everything went silent. The room was empty, but the mirror above his dresser was uncovered. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. At first, everything looked normal, just the room reflected back at me. But then I realized I wasn't in the reflection. The dresser, the bed, the window, it was all there, but I wasn't. I spun around, panic surging through me, and the door slammed shut. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was there again. Only it wasn't me. It stepped closer to the glass, its movements slow and deliberate, its head tilted slightly, and its lips curled into a wide, unnatural grin. "You're on the wrong side," it said, its voice soft and amused. "This morning, I woke up in Evan's room. The mirror is gone. and I can't find the door. It started out like a scene from some dreamy romantic movie. I was in the cereal aisle, reaching for the last box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and her hand brushed mine as she reached for it too. I looked up to find myself staring into the warmest brown eyes I'd ever seen. She laughed, the sound soft and musical, and said, "Guess we've got the same taste." She had this easygoing confidence, like she wasn't a stranger but someone I'd known forever. Her name was Kate. She was beautiful in that effortless way, with a quick smile and this energy that seemed to light up the air around her. Over coffee, I learned she was smart, funny, with a way of looking right at you like you were the only person in the room. That day led to a second date, and a third, until days turned into weeks and I was hooked. She had a mysterious edge, though, something she didn't fully reveal. It was in the way she talked about her family, this tight-knit group of women who lived on a homestead tucked deep in the woods. "It's like a haven," she said. "No noise, no distractions, just peace." She smiled, but her eyes had this far-off look, like she was seeing something I couldn't. Then one night, she asked me to visit the homestead with her. She wanted me to see her world, as she put it. I didn't hesitate. I would have followed her anywhere. The drive was longer than I expected, and the forest seemed to close in tighter around us the further we went. We finally turned down a dirt road that snaked through dense trees, branches scraping against the car windows. It was almost dark when we reached the homestead, a cluster of cabins that seemed to appear out of nowhere, nestled deep in the woods of the trees. I'd expected some idyllic little village, but this place felt wrong, oppressive, like the air was thick with something unseen. Women stood in front of their cabins, watching as we pulled in, their expressions unreadable. Kate led me inside one of the larger cabins, handed me a cup of tea. I took a sip, but it tasted strange, metallic and bitter. The room spun, my vision blurred, and the last thing I saw was Kate's face, her smile melting into a cold, unfeeling stare. When I woke, I was laying on a cold, damp stone floor. My wrists were bound behind my back, my head pounding as I tried to focus. The room was dark, the air thick with the smell of mold and something metallic, something like blood. I struggled, called out, but my voice echoed back hollow and empty. Then I heard a low, rattling breath from somewhere nearby. "Quiet. Don't draw attention to yourself," came a voice barely more than a whisper. I twisted, straining to see it, and finally spotted him. A man slumped in the corner, his face battered and bruised, his eyes hollow with terror. He looked at me, his gaze a mixture of despair and something else. Recognition. "They got you too?" he rasped, his eyes locking onto mine, then shifting almost fearfully toward the door. What is this place?" I managed, panic clawing up my throat. He shook his head, voice trembling. "She told you her name was Kate, didn't she?" He laughed bitterly, his voice like sandpaper. "Yeah, that's what she told me too. Kate, Ashley, Mary. She's used them all. It's not her real name. None of them are real." A chill crept up my spine. I tried to argue, to defend her, but his eyes held a look that crushed every word before it formed. "She and the others bring men here," he continued, his voice hollow. "They lure, charm us, bring us here like lambs to slaughter. I've been here for days, maybe weeks, watching them kill." I barely had time to process his words before the door creaked open. Kate walked in, but she wasn't the woman I'd fallen for. She was cold, her eyes as dark as the shadows pressing in around us. 2 other women followed her, their faces as blank and hollow as hers. They grabbed the man, dragging him out of the room. His screams started almost immediately, desperate and raw, growing fainter until there was only silence. When they brought him back, he was nothing more than a lifeless shell, his face twisted in horror. I felt bile rise in my throat as I looked away, fighting down the panic, trying to keep control. Hours passed, maybe days. I barely ate, barely slept, every sound from above making me flinch, my mind unraveling as I waited for them to come back for me. I thought about my family, my friends, anyone who might notice I was gone, but the days kept dragging on and my hope was slipping away. Then one night, a new prisoner arrived, a man no older than me, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. I watched him, hoping he had a plan, but he was as lost as I was. And then one night he snapped. I watched as he managed to loosen his bindings and dashed for the door, his footsteps frantic as he bolted down the hall. I heard him shout as he made it to the clearing outside, followed by a single, echoing gunshot. His body hit the ground with a dull, final thud. And then there was silence. I'd given up. There was no hope, no escape. I was weak, broken, waiting for the inevitable. But then in a desperate flash, I remembered my smartwatch. I must have triggered the emergency alert when I'd thrashed against my restraints. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I drifted in and out of consciousness, time slipping through my fingers, and then faintly, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. My heart hammered as red and blue lights flashed through the cabin windows, the harsh beams cutting through the darkness. Shouts erupted outside, doors splintered open, footsteps thundered above me, and then hands were on me, lifting me, carrying me out. As I stumbled out of the cabin, I looked back, and there she was, Kate, or whatever her name was. She stood in the shadows just beyond the reach of the lights, her expression as empty as the forest around her, her eyes meeting mine with a look that chilled me to the bone. She watched me as they led me away, and then she vanished into the trees. The police found nothing but the empty cabins when they returned. Kate and the others had vanished without a trace. I'm back in the city now, safe, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Late at night, I catch glimpses of her in crowds, feel her eyes on me from across a crowded street, see her smile in strangers' faces, and I know one day I'll turn around and she'll be there, waiting, ready to lure her next victim into the darkness. I think I was about 7 or 8 at the time when this occurred. My parents had been divorced since I was 5, and so they had shared custody of me. My dad had me for the weekend and every other week. Typically on a Friday, we would go out to my Uncle Rob's, who lived in the sticks. My dad and him and a few other guys would meet and go to his garage in the back to shoot the bull, smoke, and play either poker, ping pong, darts, or whatever. I always liked this because I got to stay up a little later and got to visit my cousin Cassie. Plus we went to Blockbuster and he let me rent a couple of movies, get a couple of Reese's peanut butter cups, and we had Mickey D's for dinner on the way up. We made the 45-minute drive out into the boonies, and I got excited when Dad drove up the long driveway and I could see the dim amber glow of Uncle Rob's porch light. We parked next to 2 other pickup trucks, and I immediately got out with my Blockbuster sack of Reese's and 2 movies, rushed to the door, and rang the doorbell. My dad was just coming up the steps of the porch when my cousin Cassie greeted us and let us in. I hugged her and went to bear hug Uncle Rob as he kneeled down to greet me. "Ah, you're getting big, Mikey. Your daddy feeding you Miracle Grow?" Uncle Rob said jokingly as I hugged him as tight as I could. "We had McDonald's," I blurted out. Afterwards, my dad and Uncle Rob greeted each other and made their way to the kitchen where all the other guys were. Before he did, my dad kneeled down to me and said, "All right, kid, you know the rules. You behave yourself, okay?" "I will," I replied reassuredly. Alright, we're going out back now. Remember, the two-way by the back door. I will, I repeated. My dad and the guys made their way out the back door and towards the garage. Cassie and I made our way into the living room, and I gave her one of the Reese's and the movies. What do you want to watch first? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Aladdin? I asked, presenting the VHS covers to her. I want to watch Turtles, she replied. I then handed her the movie, and she went to go turn the TV on and put the movies in the VCR. I'm gonna make some popcorn, she said as she ran into the kitchen. I just sat on the couch and watched the previews. A few minutes later, the movie had just started and she brought out the popcorn in a plastic green bowl, and we shared it along with the Reese's while we watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think it was more than an hour later, and Cassie said that she had to go to the bathroom. She left the room and I stayed watching the movie. I was resting my head on the arm of the sofa, and I suppose I nodded off while the movie was playing. I then slowly started to wake up and stretched my arms and legs. I then noticed that the TV displayed static and the soft white noise emanating from it. I looked around the room and noticed that the living room lights were off, but the kitchen light was illuminating from the next room. I then realized that Cassie was nowhere to be found. Cassie? I called out to her, but there was no response. I called out to her again and there was still no response. I began to yell out to her, but there was still no response. I don't know what to make of this, so I got up from the couch and called out to her while walking into the kitchen. It was all too quiet except for the ceiling fan still spinning and wobbling. I looked up at the clock hanging from the wall above the fridge and saw that it was past 9:30. I couldn't tell if I was reading the time right, or if the clock was broken, but I could see the second hand ticking. I went back into the darkened living room and looked on the digital display of the VCR, and it read 9:34 p.m. Usually my dad and I could have been on the road by now, around that time, and he would have me in bed by 10. Cassie? I shouted almost at the top of my lungs. I then felt this dread creeping onto me, as if I was all alone in this house. Where did she go? I've had no responses to my continuous yelling for her. I went to the bathroom door and saw in the space below that the light was still on. Cassie? I knocked on the door. Are you in here? But there was no answer back. I opened the door to the bathroom and saw that the light was still on. She wasn't in here either. I then went to the two-way radio near the back door and pressed the button to speak. Dad? Uncle Rob? Are you there? I released the button, but there was only the white noise of static. After waiting for a response, I tried again. Dad, Uncle Rob, are you there? I asked, edging on desperation and fear. I looked out the window of the back door and saw the outside and inside lights of the garage were still on. I tried the radio again, but there was still no answer from anyone. Just static. The thought of going out to the garage at night was already creepy enough. Did I really have to make my way to the garage by myself in the dark? I tried the radio a few more times before giving up on it, and concluded that I would have to go to the garage, in the dark, by myself. I wanted Cassie to be here with me. I wanted my dad and Uncle Rob. I didn't want to be here anymore. I forced myself to open the back door, then the screen door. I stuck my head out, scanning my immediate surroundings. After seeing the coast was clear, I slowly stepped out onto the back porch and I started shivering. Even though it was a warm September night, I cautiously made my way down the back door steps and my body tensed up. I crept towards the light of the garage, trying not to make any crunching noises under my feet. I then realized, as I was trying to keep silent, that I normally heard crickets and all that, but it was all eerily quiet. I felt like I was completely alone. It felt like the garage was a mile away, and I was completely on edge with every step I took. I quickened my pace as soon as I was close to the light of the garage and burst through the door. Dad? I yelled as soon as I entered the garage, but there was no one here. The smell of cigarette smoke wafted in the air. The radio was playing the country music they usually listen to. There was playing cards left scattered on the table. But where did everyone go? Where's Uncle Rob? Dad, where is everyone? The dread started to creep more into me, and I swear I was just about to panic. Suddenly, I heard the muffled, distant noise of a gunshot echoing outside that broke my train of thoughts. Then another one, then several more, to where I got so scared that I ran back into the house as fast as I could and slammed the door behind me. I then heard a couple more gunshots, but then I heard a high-pitched shriek which made my blood run cold, and I turned to look outside the window, keeping my head low. I didn't see anything, but I could hear another distant shriek. I've never heard anything like this before. I had a feeling that it wasn't an owl or a deer or anything that I've heard out here on Uncle Rob's place. I then could hear some shouting, echoing. Dad? Uncle Rob? I searched for anything to appear in the garage's outside light, but several minutes passed and there was nothing. I then walked into the kitchen, lifted myself up on the sink, and looked out the window. I continued to look out into the darkness until I heard my name. Mikey! I heard a voice coming from outside. Mikey! It sounded like Uncle Rob. I was looking out to see if I could see him, but nothing came into view. A few minutes passed and I heard Uncle Rob calling my name again. Mikey! I was about to run outside to call back out to him until I saw a shadowy figure from a distance. I couldn't make out exactly what it looked like, but I could see it was a tall, lanky figure that lurched stiffly and so inhuman. I froze staring at this thing moving across the yard, twitching disgustingly, and I think I heard it hiss. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck sticking up. Mikey! It was Uncle Rob's voice, but this wasn't Uncle Rob that I was seeing out the window. It turned its head towards me, and I saw the eyeless face of a monster. I panicked and I fell onto the floor, struggling to get myself in a kitchen cabinet. I was able to hide in a cabinet where I had an angled but clear view of the kitchen window, and I watched the window through the crack of the slightly open cabinet door. I don't know how much time had passed, but nothing was happening, and I began to calm down. I was about to come out when I suddenly saw the monster's head appear at the window, and a cold shiver instantly went up my spine and the hairs stood back up again. It pressed its hideous, pale, eyeless face against the glass and slid its face around as if trying to get a better view inside. The face looked almost horse-like, but the muzzle was shorter and gaunt. It bared its teeth, but I don't think it had any lips or anything that would hide them. Its nostrils flared and would leave fogged spots that quickly dissipated on the windows. Mikey! It barely moved its mouth to speak, using Uncle Rob's exact voice. Mikey! The sound of Uncle Rob's voice coupled with its grotesque face had me totally unsettled. Why did it sound like Uncle Rob? Let me in, Mikey. Oh, hell no. There was no way I was leaving this cabinet to let that creature in. Suddenly I heard a couple of gunshots ringing out, along with some men yelling. The creature let out a shriek as it fled away from the window. As soon as I heard it shriek, I almost vomited. How can something like this exist? Why was it here? Also, how did it know my name? Soon the shrieking faded away in the distance and a couple of the men shouting to each other whilst I still hid in the cabinet. Moments later, I heard the back door fly open and my dad's voice calling. Michael, he called out. Michael, where are you? He sounded frantic. I didn't come out as believe that it was that pale monster until I saw my dad come into the kitchen. Michael? He called out, and I immediately spilled out of the cabinet onto the floor. Dad, I responded. He picked me up off the ground and threw me over his shoulder. We gotta go, Michael, he said with a panic that I've never heard before in his voice. He carried me out the front door and to his pickup, where he opened the driver's side and actually threw me in onto the passenger side as he hopped in and started the truck. We peeled out of the driveway and sped off onto the dirt road. Dad, what's going on? I started to cry. I'll tell you later. We need to get out of here first. His eyes never left the road. All I did was held my arms and cried as my dad was driving us out. Sometime later, we were back on the smooth paved road heading home, and everything started to calm down at that point. Dad turned his head to look behind him, and he let out a sigh of relief. He turned to me and asked, "You okay, Mikey?" His voice now took on a calmer and fatherly tone. "What's happening? What was that monster?" I sniffled, waiting an explanation. My dad turned to look at the road and shook his head. "I don't know, Mikey." He said in a tone that unsettled me once again. "I don't know. All I knew was that I had to get you out of there." "What about Cassie?" I inquired. "Uncle Rob's gonna take care of her. He told me to get you out of there while he and everyone else hunted that thing down." He replied, "Did you see her?" I prodded more. "No, can't say that I had. I'm sure she's safe, Mikey." He assured me, but I was still worried. We had driven so many miles down the road, and we started to see the lights from the town that we're returning to. "Listen," my dad broke the silence, which made me jump a little. "For now, don't tell your mom what happened. I'll do that. We called the police a while ago, and they should be on their way to help out Uncle Rob. I'm sure we'll hear from them tomorrow, okay?" "Okay," I replied, still worrying about Cassie and Uncle Rob. There was not a word said between us on the rest of the drive home. I don't tell this story often, mostly because I hate reliving it, but also because when you try to explain something like this, people smile politely, maybe even laugh it off. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And God help me, I know what's still out there. It was late October when Eric and I decided to go camping in Blackwood Forest. We wanted to get away. No phones, no city noise, just miles of trees and sky. Blackwood had a reputation for being remote, untouched, and other things, though we didn't pay much attention to the stories. Stories about strange disappearances and voices were just campfire fodder, or so we thought. The hike in was uneventful, beautiful even. The trail wove between towering pines that stretched like ancient sentinels toward the sky, their branches forming a canopy that muted the sunlight. By the time we found a clearing and pitched our tent, the world was steeped in twilight. Everything was bathed in this eerie orange glow, the kind that makes shadows seem longer and darker than they should be. We built a fire, drank a couple of beers, and talked about nothing important. It was quiet, too quiet. At first we chalked it up to the forest being remote, but looking back, the stillness was unnatural. No rustling leaves, no distant owl calls, just the crackle of the fire and our own voices. As night fell, the silence seemed to thicken, pressing in around us. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. Your breathing, the occasional pop of a log in the fire. When we crawled into the tent, I remember saying something like, "At least it's peaceful," but Eric didn't respond. He just stared into the trees, his face pale as snow. I should have asked him what he saw. I woke up hours later to the sound of footsteps. At first I thought it was Eric moving around, but then I realized the steps were outside the tent. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the dead leaves. They circled us, pausing every so often before resuming their measured pace. I lay there, my pulse pounding in my ears, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. A deer, maybe. A fox. But then the steps stopped, and something spoke. "Jonathan, Eric." It wasn't loud, but the voice carried, slipping through the tent walls like smoke. It was soft and sing-song, the way you might call to a child who was lost. I froze, my mouth went dry, and for a second I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then Eric whispered, "You heard that, right?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me in the dark. The voice came again, closer this time. "Come out and play." There was a lilting quality to the words, like it was enjoying itself. I wanted to move, to grab the flashlight, to do something, but my body wouldn't obey. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming that whatever was out there wasn't human. Then the scratching started. It was faint at first, a soft drag of nails against fabric. It started low near the base of the tent, then traveled upward, slow and deliberate. The sound was maddening, like whoever or whatever it was wanted us to know it was there. Eric grabbed the flashlight, his hand trembling so badly the beam wobbled across the tent walls. "We've got to go," he whispered, his voice shaking. "No," I hissed back. "We don't know what's out there." He didn't answer. He just unzipped the tent in one frantic motion, and before I could stop him, he was gone, the flashlight bouncing as he bolted into the darkness. For a second, I was paralyzed, caught between the safety of the tent and the terror of what lay outside. But then something slammed into the tent, hard enough to knock me sideways. The walls caved inward, and I scrambled out, my breath hitching as I hit the cold night air. The forest was a maze of shadows. The moon barely pierced the canopy, and the trees looked wrong. Their trunks were gnarled, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes, like skeletal hands reaching toward me. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like blood. I heard Eric screaming. It wasn't a normal scream. It was guttural, broken, the sound of someone being ripped apart. It came from deeper in the woods, and every instinct told me to run the other way, but I couldn't leave him. I took a step, then another. My legs shaking so badly I thought they'd give out. "Eric?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. The laughter started then. It was faint at first, low chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere, but it grew louder, more distorted until it was a chorus of voices, overlapping and echoing. Some were high-pitched and manic, others low and guttural, like growls. I turned, and that's when I saw it. At first it was just a shape in the darkness, a pale smudge against the black, but as it stepped into the moonlight, I felt my stomach drop. Its limbs were too long, its skin stretched tight over jagged bones. Its face was wrong. The eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth was an impossible grin, the teeth jagged and uneven. It tilted its head, watching me. Then it spoke. "Jonathan," it whispered, and the sound was like needles sliding into my brain. "Don't you want to see your friend?" I didn't think. I just ran. The forest seemed to shift around me, the trees bending and twisting, their roots clawing at my feet. The laughter followed, growing louder, closer until it was in my ears, in my head. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the heavy crunch of footsteps right behind me. When I burst onto the trail and saw my car, I nearly sobbed. I threw myself inside, locking the doors and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I floored it, gravel spraying as I sped down the dirt road. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the forest, its head tilted, its grin stretched impossibly wide, and as the car disappeared into the distance, I swear I saw it wave. They never found Eric. The search team said there was no sign of him, no sign of us being there. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear it again, soft and teasing, just outside my window. "Help," I read in the sand, helicopter blades whirring above me. "I don't see any movement, but I can't just leave." I radio the pilot. "You think this is them?" "Only one way to know," he responds. We may have finally found them, the two women who disappeared a few weeks ago after they went overboard on a boat somewhere in the Atlantic. The helicopter begins to descend. Sand blows in all directions as we touch down. Stepping out, a faint rhythmic hum drifts through the forest, too distant to be natural. I shake it off, blaming the heat and nerves. As I get closer, I realize the sign is made from heaps of old seawood. Clever, I whisper. But who makes a help sign just to leave? I walk toward the rundown hut, searching for signs of life. Hello? I shout. No answer. Inside the hut, I find charred wood and scraps of bone. Whoever was here knew what they were doing. Paul, the pilot, walks up behind me. Find anything? He asks. No, just piles of wood and bone. Promising, but not conclusive. Paul and I venture into the dank tropical forest, searching for signs of life. Suddenly, I spot someone. A woman. Hey, I call. We're here to help. She tilts her head like a dog trying to pinpoint a sound. Then she bolts toward me, her grimace unnervingly wide. My instincts kick in. I turn and run, branches scratching at my legs, rocks sending me stumbling. By the time I reach the helicopter, gasping for breath, I turn back. Nothing. What was that? Was it one of the missing women? Paul, get back here. I radio. My voice shakes. When he arrives, I blurt out. I saw someone. She matched the description, but when I called, she sprinted at me, inhumanly fast. We search the cargo and equip ourselves with tasers. We return to where I saw her, but there's no sign. Paul finds a trail of broken sticks and we follow it. An overwhelming sense of dread clings to the air, but I don't tell Paul. I think he feels it too. As we near the end of the trail, I notice what looks like a ritual site. Stones are arranged in strange patterns. Charred leaves and sticks litter the ground. Symbols are carved into the nearby coconut tree. Jagged lines catching what little light filters through the canopy. Paul tries to lighten the mood. You believe in this ritual stuff? He mutters, kicking dirt, his eyes darting to the carvings. I hear the tremor in his voice, despite his attempt to sound calm. I don't know, I reply. But isn't it a bit suspicious that this is right here after I was chased? I continue to investigate, but then I hear it, a deep, animal-like groan. My head snaps back along with Paul's. There she is, the woman I saw earlier, but this time she has a partner. One leaps at Paul, knocking him out before he can even reach for his taser. I equip mine and aim at the closest woman. As I discharge the taser, she grows visibly agitated, but not by the weapon. It has no effect. She grabs the taser wire with a snarl, yanking it from my hand. Before I can react, the other woman tackles me to the ground with a strength I didn't know was possible. Everything goes black. When I awaken, I'm lying on a rock in the center of the ritual site. My hands are bound, and the air feels thicker, darker. I scream. Where's Paul? What did you do to him? One of the women approaches. Her expression is blank, but her eyes gleam in the dim light. He is elsewhere, she says with a slow, eerie voice. The other woman joins her, and they begin to chant in a low, guttural language that reverberates in my chest. The words twist around me like a smothering fog. I shout, "What are you doing?" But they ignore me. Their voices growing louder, the chant quickening. Suddenly their eyes snap open, looking past me as if something unseen had arrived. Their jaws unhinge slightly as they smile in perfect unison, teeth sharper than they had any right to be. Their lips stop moving, but I hear their voices, clearer than before. He has come for you. He will show you the way. A shiver races down my spine. I pull against my restraints. The woman on my left draws a knife and steps closer. She tilts her head, watching me with an almost curious gaze. "Don't worry," she whispers, her smile chillingly gentle. "You won't be alone." In the distance, I hear a familiar voice, Paul's voice calling my name, but it sounds wrong, distorted, like an echo through a tunnel. My heart pounds as I realize the voice is coming closer, but I can't see anything in the darkness. The air cools as the malevolent force nears. The woman raises the knife above her, her eyes glassy, almost devilish, as if she's looking at something, just behind me. Fall has always been my favorite season, especially Thanksgiving. The food, the smell of crisp air, the crunch of leaves underneath my feet. I've always found comfort in the spirit of Thanksgiving, but now I can only remember my hand feeling the bitter cold farmhouse beside me, and my feet crunching a hazel eye growing out of the dirt in the garden. I struggled to push through the backyard as I felt crooked hands pulling me into the ground, and deformed mouths groaning for me to stop moving. After what must have been 2 minutes wading through the rain in a sea of malformed limbs, I could finally breathe in the shed about 200 feet from the back door of my house. My grandparents left me their farm in the will, and their crops at Thanksgiving were always stellar. But there was something extra special about them. It wasn't just their taste or texture that made this holiday the highlight of my year. My grandparents had always wished to grow a big and healthy family, and that's just what they did. The dirt in their garden turned a single seed into an entire field of corn in mere hours, and a lone tomato gave me enough energy to break my school's cross-country record by over a minute. Grandpa Gil always called it a miracle, a gift from God, to make sure their family was always healthy and provided for. When they passed, my Grandma Betty and Grandpa Gil had their ashes spread in the garden, part of the dirt that gave their family life for so many years. I had always respected their wishes, growing my own vegetables and paying respects to their patch whenever I could. My only mistake was leaving the faucet on last night. How was I supposed to know that the miracle came from the water and not the ground? I had barely cut the grass since I inherited my grandparents' farm, so the sea of weeds behind me did well to consume the fleshy undergrowth. Still, in a flash of lightning, I caught a glimpse of the yard more vivid in my mind than anything I had ever thought of before. There were thousands of heads, pulsing and expanding out of the ground like rising bread. They looked nearly human, were it not for the ones that grew 3 eyes, or an ear that resembled a clot of blood more than anything else. What I didn't like to think about was how they were clearly my grandparents, mixed together and screaming as a malevolent tumor, eating away at their miracle. I grabbed the biggest can of gasoline I could find and I poured it across the garden. The head screamed as the foul concoction pulled in one of its mouths, or waterlogged an extra ear somewhere in the dirt. After an eternity, I had covered my entire yard, this organism in fuel. Then I took the lighter out of my coat pocket and dropped it to the ground, setting it ablaze. I watched as the pitch-black night turned to hell in an instant, my entire yard glowing red and orange. I shut my eyes and started to cry once I heard the screams of my grandparents, 1,000 of them, wailing in pain as they were once again reduced to a pile of ash. I could hear their house begin to crumble and break, falling to the ground. I made my way to my truck and called the insurance agency, barely able to hang up the phone before collapsing of exhaustion. In the morning, everything was gone. There was just a pile of charred rubble and a massive patch of burnt grass. The rain had put out the rest of the fire, and my insurance agent, Lionel, assured me that the claim I had filed was sure to go through. We have been going through a drought, and I was far from the first to be paid for lightning damage in the countryside. "Well, would you look at that?" Lionel said, pointing toward the remains of my shed. "What is it?" I asked. "There's a sunflower right over there. You see?" There I saw it, a lone flower, watching the sun as it peeked over the horizon. "Oh, there's more than I thought. Look, there's 3, 4, no, wait, 5. I could see it now, more and more stalks peeking out of the ground. From the distance, they looked tranquil, but something about them put me on edge. I didn't want to get closer to them. I was done with this place. If that's not a symbol of hope, I don't know what is. Look, Ted, I know that this is hard. I can't even imagine what you're going through right now, but that's a miracle right there. If that's not proof this will help you grow, I don't know what is. I shuddered at the thought. Thanks, Lionel, I said. But I don't know about that. I think I'm going to move closer to the city. I told him. I don't think I need to grow for quite some time. I've been hunting all my life, and I have yet to see anything else like what I saw. To this day, I still don't have a definite answer for it. Maybe some of y'all will know. I was 19 at the time. I had just gotten off of work, so I figured I might as well go hunting. I got my rifle and hopped in my truck, and away I went. I got there about 3.5 hours before dark. Plenty of time to get my stand. I crossed the creek and started up the hill, and I saw something move fairly fast through the trees. I figured it must have just been a deer. Already spooked one. Not good. Got to my stand and climbed up it. Text my dad to tell him I got there safe. I loaded my rifle and got comfortable and waited. About an hour later, a herd of does I had seen on my cameras showed up. They milled around for about 30 minutes. Before they left to go eat some acorns behind me, I saw a 4-point about 10 minutes later. Not what I was after. About 30 minutes later, I hear something making racket about 200 yards in front of me, in a tree line across a field. I had an iron-sighted gun, so I wasn't willing to shoot the 200 yards. The gun I had was a .444 Marlin lever action. I'd hunted with it since I was 12, and had taken countless deer with it. It's a bit overkill for deer, but I liked the stopping power. Eventually a deer walked out. Looked like a pretty good buck. As he got closer, about 150 yards, I noticed something was off with him. Maybe it was the CWD disease, or whatever it's called, I thought. It started making these unholy sounds and started to get up on its hind legs. I'd heard stories from old-timers about things that go thump in the woods, but never believed them. I decided I was probably just tired from work. He stayed in the field, still acting weird, until it was just about time for me to get down and head back to Mother Truck. I started to get down and was about 10 feet off the ground when I heard a blood-curdling scream from the field. It scared the daylights out of me, and I slipped and fell off the ladder. When I got up, I looked back, and it was on its hind legs in a dead sprint towards me. I took off running and jumped in the creek and laid down on the bank. I peeked over the side, and it was up there, walking and looking for presumably me. He saw me, so I raised my rifle and fired. The shot rang out, and I heard it hit him. I racked another round in, but he was on the ground. I was relieved and my mind was spinning. Before I could think of my next move, he was back on his legs and started walking towards me. I ran so fast I thought I was going to fall. He was about 15 yards behind me, but he was closing in. I turned around and fired another shot, with hopes that it would stun him. It didn't. I counted my options and decided on a risky plan. I ran to a secondary path out, one which had a creek that was flooded from rain the night before. I swam across it, but he couldn't swim, and he didn't want to seem to get anywhere near water. He let out another blood-curdling scream, so I shot him again. This time he screamed like it hurt him. I had 1 bullet left after that. I got to my truck, and of course it wouldn't start. That's what I get for driving a diesel in late November. I finally got it to turn over and started to back up when I saw him running at me, faster than he previously was. I stuck my rifle out the window of my truck and waited until he got close. He was about 10 feet in front of me when I fired. I could see him well when he was that close. He was a 10-point. His head had no bottom jaw or eyes, and his hide was peeling away. His entire body looked withered. When I shot, he hit the dirt hard. I hightailed it home and told my dad what had happened. He didn't believe me. I went back the next day to see if there was any proof. He was gone. All the tracks were gone. There was nothing to even indicate it had happened besides my spent casings on the ground. If anyone has any idea about what that thing was, please let me know. I'm writing this while I'm in the deer stand, so hopefully it's not bad luck. Although I do hear a strange sound in the trees across from me. I used to laugh it off when my 5-year-old would talk about the whispering man. Kids have wild imaginations, right? She'd tell me he would sit by her window at night and whisper things to her. Stories about lost kids who needed friends. She'd say he was lonely and didn't like grown-ups. It was creepy, sure, but I brushed it off. I'd say things like, "Wow, that's spooky," or joke that she was going to be a writer someday. I figured she was piecing things together from cartoons or stuff she overheard. Then about a week ago, I heard it too. I was up late, sitting on the couch in the living room scrolling on my phone. It was around midnight. I suddenly heard this faint, scratchy voice coming from her room, barely above a whisper, like someone was struggling to speak. My heart started pounding, but I told myself it was just the wind or some late-night TV echoing from a neighbor's house. Then it got louder. This strange, raspy murmur, almost rhythmic like someone softly chanting. I walked quietly down the hall to her room, barely breathing. When I peeked in, I saw her sitting up in bed, staring straight at her window. When she noticed me, she put her finger to her lips like she was warning me to stay silent. Then she whispered, "Don't scare him, Mom. He gets mad when you see him." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Her window was open. I could have sworn I had locked it before bed. The next morning I asked her about it as casually as I could manage, but she just shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "He likes it when you don't believe in him," she said. "It makes him stronger." She didn't say anything else. Just went back to her breakfast like it was the most normal thing in the world. I wanted to chalk it up to a dream, maybe even my imagination playing tricks on me, but ever since that night, I feel like there's something wrong in our house. I keep finding her window unlocked, no matter how many times I check it, and the whispers, sometimes I hear them even when I'm alone. Late at night, just barely there, but constant. I started sleeping with my door cracked open so I could hear if she got up. Last night, I heard her talking again. When I went in, she was sitting on the floor by her window, having what looked like a full conversation in whispers. I asked her, "Who are you talking to?" She didn't look at me. She kept her gaze fixed outside, like she could see someone just beyond the glass. Then she said, "He doesn't want you to know him, Mom. He only talks to me." That's when she finally looked at me, and her eyes, I don't know how to explain it, but she looked different, empty almost. I don't know what to do. Every night I hear him. Every night her window's unlocked. I'm terrified to sleep, but even more terrified to stay awake, waiting to hear that voice again. Has anyone else gone through something like this? I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind or if something's actually here. Losing someone you're close to is always a horrific experience, but when you lose that someone in a sudden and strange way right before your eyes, it hurts so much worse. That someone was my best friend Harry. We'd known each other for the better part of 6 years. I first met Harry on move-in day at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. He was one of my roommates, and we hit it off pretty much right away. I don't remember how it came up exactly, but it turned out we both had a niche interest in cryptozoology. In what little free time we were given at the academy, we would drive to the infamous Bridgewater Triangle in search of whatever paranormal activity there might be. Ghosts, UFOs, you name it. Neither of us truly believed that we'd ever find anything. We mostly just used our little misadventures as an excuse to drink in the woods. The closest we ever came to some kind of supernatural encounter was when we stumbled across a hairless raccoon. It was certainly the strangest thing we ever saw out there. Those 4 years were some of the hardest in my life, and if it weren't for Harry, they very well could have been the last. As cliché as it sounds, he became a brother to me. I'd even go visit his family with him on vacation and holidays. His parents would jokingly refer to me as their long-lost kid. Our graduation was one of the hardest days of my life. I've never been good with goodbyes, even with people I didn't like, but Harry was on a whole other level. I nearly cried in front of his whole family. Thank God I didn't. Harry went on to work for a tanker company based out of Seattle, and I went off to work on tugboats in Alaska. We kept in touch the whole time, but it just wasn't the same as seeing him in person. Our schedules didn't line up well either, so we couldn't ever really see each other. That went on for about 2 years before I expressed interest in going to work on the tanker with him. He seemed pretty excited about the idea and offered to put in a good word for me. He had already worked himself up to the position of third mate, and was on pretty good terms with a couple of the captains there, so I figured his word was good and went for it. I ended up getting the job and started pretty quickly after finishing my last hitch with the tugs. I was even lucky enough to get to work my first hitch on the tanker with Harry. It was the first time I got to really spend time with him in 2 years, and it was nice to have a friendly face to help me adjust to life on the tanker. Working on a new ship is always a nerve-wracking experience, especially one as large as the one I was now living on. It was about 680 feet from bow to stern, which is relatively small for a tanker. Life aboard was actually really nice. Since these hitches are pretty long, they try to make sure there are a lot of accommodations on board. A dedicated cook, TVs, a gym, and there was even a driving simulator set up. Between Harry and the ship herself, it seemed like this was going to be a great fit for me, and I was excited to start my first voyage aboard. We would be leaving from LA and heading to Japan. The whole trip should take about 20 days given we avoid any major setbacks. Looking back at it now, it's hard to fathom how differently I would feel on the other side of those 20 days. The first few days went fairly well. Most of life on a ship underway is routine maintenance, cleaning, and standing watch. Lookout watches were my favorite, whether it be at the helm itself or just helping to keep an eye out. Not too much goes on in the middle of the Pacific, so a lot of the time I'd be up there with Harry, and we'd just joke around and share stories with the rest of the crew on the bridge. There were a couple of occasions where we had to make passing arrangements with another vessel, or we got reports of free floating containers in the area, but aside from that, it was pretty uneventful. It wasn't until the 8th day that it would change. I wasn't on the bridge when this happened, but Harry filled me in when he saw me. The incident occurred during the night watch. Lights were spotted on the horizon, which is not an uncommon occurrence at all, as lights are used to identify ships and communicate critical info. Like what sides you are seeing so you can determine what direction the ship is headed. For example, all ships have a green light on their starboard side, red on the port, a white light on the stern and masthead, and then there are yellow lights to indicate if they're towing something. What was uncommon about the lights were their color. Apparently it was a horizontal line of interchanging green and purple lights. There are no vessels that use purple lights in any scenario. There was some talk of maybe they were actually red and just looked purple at a distance for whatever reason. But even then, that pattern of red and green isn't used at all in the maritime world. They disappeared after about 20 minutes and weren't seen again. It really wasn't that significant of an incident at all, and was forgotten about almost immediately, but it was the first in a series of strange occurrences. Harry especially didn't think much of it, although he did crack a joke saying it might have been a flock of ropen. If you've never heard of them, ropen are a cryptid from the southwest Pacific that are basically just glowing pterodactyls. I laughed, but deep down I thought about how cool it would be to see some kind of sea monster while we were out here. Like how the sailors of old would talk about seeing mermaids or kraken. It was a childish fantasy. but my fantasy nonetheless. The next day, we would stumble across the next strange occurrence of our journey, and this time I would be the one to witness it. I was out on bow watch, where I would stand at the very front of the ship to help keep a lookout instead of up on the bridge. I spotted something floating in the water about 500 feet off of our port side. It looked fairly large, so I called it out to the captain on the radio. I then took a closer look through my binoculars and realized what was in the water. It was a dead whale. There were even a few sharks feasting on it. It didn't look like it had been dead for long. Well, it's not a typical sight. Coming across a dead whale is by no means an unnatural one. I've seen pictures and videos of scenes just like this before, but what I haven't seen before is the types of injuries this dead whale had. There were the easily explainable ones, such as the large chunks of missing flesh from the opportunistic sharks or holes pecked into the surface of the whale from seabirds, but then there were the long, deep gashes in the whale. They were straight, almost parallel lines, and the flesh around the wounds seemed almost charred. I'm by no means an expert on decaying whales, so I very well may have just misunderstood what the process of decay looks like on a whale, but nonetheless, something about it just felt off to me. The bridge team seemed to have gotten a kick out of it. The captain even took a picture to send his wife, who was a middle school science teacher, so she could show her class. The thought of the roping entered my head again. The childish side of me thought maybe, just maybe, this whale was a victim of that flock, and the gashes in its side were from the mighty claws of those bioluminescent pterosaurs. It certainly was the funniest explanation I could think of. Maybe that's what I'll tell my kids someday, if I ever have kids at least. I radioed up to Harry joking about the roping, to which I got a quick laugh back and a confused captain asking, "What the hell is a roping?" I embarrassingly explained it in the most simple way I could think of. A glowing pterodactyl, to which the captain only said, "Oh, okay, sweet." Another 2 days would go by without incident, but the next occurrence would be much more notable. Yet again I was there for what happened. This time I was up on the bridge at the helm when something strange appeared on our radar. It was showing a large target about 15 miles off of our starboard bow. Based on the size of the blob on the radar, it would have been roughly the same size as us, but it could not be spotted with the bare eye of our ECDIS, boat GPS. We were nowhere near any land masses whatsoever, and even if we were, we should have been able to see it. The weather was completely clear and our visibility was well past 15 miles. There was no land and there were no ships. Large targets appearing out of nowhere on radar is actually somewhat normal due to subrefraction, and other science nonsense I could not care enough to memorize. But what isn't normal is these ghost targets being given ARPA data. ARPA is an add-on to radar that will automatically track targets in your area and warn you if they become a danger. ARPA will automatically calculate the target speed, course, distance to you, CPA, closest point of approach, and TCPA, time of CPA. Our ARPA was giving us all of this data on the target, meaning that something was actually there, and that something was moving. According to the ARPA, it wouldn't be a danger to our course, and was in fact moving away from us. This was pretty confusing to everyone on the bridge, including the captain. There was no real explanation for this other than it just being a really weird glitch. However, the captain decided to take extra precaution anyway, and ordered the lookouts to keep an eye out for our ghost. If it was in fact real, no one ever caught a glimpse of it. I tried to think of a way I could tie this into my ever-growing ropin' lore, but it was just too weird of an incident. And unless you had somewhat of an understanding of how radar works, it's not one you'd find any significance in. Instead, I tried to turn it into its own sea story. I settled on our radar picking up on a ghost ship. I was pretty proud of that one, but I never got around to telling Harry. which was a real shame because I think he would have really liked it, and now I'll never have the chance to tell him. As weird as that whole ghost radar situation was, it would not be the last of the day's weirdness. In the last hour of the day, which we started to get some very strange communications over the radio. It had been 4 days since we last communicated with another vessel, and 3 since we heard any communications over the radio at all. All vessels are supposed to monitor 2 different radio channels at all times. Channel 13 for general communications, and Channel 16 for emergency communications. Your maydays, sinking ships, fires, etc. These new chatterings were coming over Channel 16. What we heard was almost nonsense. They were complete sentences, but they were without clear context or purpose, and the message was being spoken interchangeably by different voices, switching word from word. The voices of both men and women, with various accents, would all take turns speaking as if it was a Mad Lib. From what I remember, it went something like this: American male, pon-pon, British male, this, Scandinavian female, vessel, Indian male, in need, American female, immediate, Eastern European male, passing, British male, request, Japanese male, stay, Middle Eastern male, course, French female, starboard, Chinese male, passing. The voices then cut out to brief static and then silence. The captain was more annoyed than anything. Everyone chalked it up to interference, and the message to just be nonsense. But it sat with me. As chaotic and jumbled as the message was, it was clearly trying to communicate something to us. Whoever made that message urgently needed us to stay on course. I'm not sure why they would have chosen to do it like that instead of just communicating normally. The wording of the transmission was also strange. It got the message across, but it was done so choppily, like whoever made it did not have a great grasp of the English language, or only had a limited amount of words it could use. The whole situation just did not sit right with me. The only way I can describe it was as uncanny. After our watch ended, I took Harry aside and asked him what he thought of today. He didn't seem to be anywhere near as freaked out as I was, but he did admit that the strange occurrences of today were both firsts for him. He told me not to worry, that weird stuff just happens sometimes, especially when you're trapped in a metal box all day surrounded by hundreds of miles of nothingness. He then threw out another quick joke about ghosts and sea monsters. I was still in my head when he said it, so I didn't catch the whole thing, but I laughed anyway because I probably would have thought whatever he actually said was funny. After our little talk, we went down to the galley to get some food before we called it in for the night. Even after hanging out with Harry, I was still a bit shaken up. I ended up having some pretty intense nightmares that night. I forgot what they were almost immediately after waking up, but I think it had to do with ghosts being on the ship or something like that. I don't think I was alone in the night I had because the whole ship had a solemn mood the next day. My gut is telling me something happened to the night crew, something strange, but none of them said anything, and the ones I specifically asked said that it was just a quiet night. The weather even reflected the mood. It wasn't bad weather by any means, just overcast with some light rain. It wouldn't take long until the next day took a grim turn. After only an hour or two into the watch, we came across another vessel, a small sailboat drifting all by its lonesome. It was spotted by the bow lookout. The mast was cracked in half and fell into the water, taking the sail with it. The deck was an absolute mess with debris and gear scattered everywhere. The hatch to the interior was also left wide open with no one in sight. The captain tried hailing the small vessel on the radio to no avail. We blared our horn to try to get the attention of anyone that might be aboard, but yet again there was no response. The captain called the vessel in to nearby authorities and warned any nearby traffic of the derelict vessel. He then decided to use our rescue boat, a small boat used for man overboard scenarios, to send a small team of the deck crew to investigate the boat and see if there is anyone in need of immediate medical assistance. It may take hours for a Coast Guard or naval vessel to get to our position, and the captain did not want to risk leaving someone to die. I volunteered to be part of the boarding party, along with 3 other crew members. We were able to get alongside the sailboat fairly quickly and easily. 3 of us climbed onto the boat and performed a quick investigation. There was no one aboard, but everything on the inside seemed untouched. Food was still on the table, life jackets were still stored away, and there was a camera sitting next to a laptop on a counter. We were specifically instructed not to touch anything unless there was an injured person on board, so I didn't investigate further, but there was already a grim fate being painted for whoever was the crew of this vessel. You could be the best swimmer in the world, but you won't survive for long in the water without a life jacket. After making absolutely sure there was no one aboard, we returned to our own vessel and reported to the captain. With the U.S. Navy sending a ship over to investigate and organize a search and rescue operation and no one in immediate danger, we were free to continue on our way. Not many words were spoken for the rest of the day. The next day was the climax of all this strange phenomena, and by far the worst day of my life. One of the guys who boarded the sailboat with me ended up getting extremely sick. I am pretty sure it was just nerves, but either way, he was puking his guts out and was in no shape to be performing his tasks for the day. We also entered an incredibly thick fog bank. Due to the importance of having a bow lookout and the fear that me and the 2 other guys that boarded the sailboat might have also contracted something, Harry volunteered to do bow lookout, even though that was technically below his duties. The captain thought that was for the best and kept us inside. Traveling through fog is always a nerve-wracking experience, especially after the day we had, and the possibility of an outbreak aboard the vessel. The bridge was masked in absolute silence. The only thing that could be heard was our fog signal, which blared every minute or so. A loud whistle followed by a distinct gong. The only other thing that could be heard were the periodic interruptions from Harry updating us from below. This would go on for 2 hours until Harry came through the radio sounding frantic. He started to hear something close, something loud. I can still hear everything he said perfectly. It's ingrained into my head. Hey, Cap, I hear something. I'm not sure what it is exactly. It doesn't sound like a foghorn or a buoy, but it's definitely not natural and it's close. Real close. I think it's getting closer. It's getting louder at least. It's like this weird whirring sound. I don't know how else to explain it. Oh, and the air. It's getting warmer. Real warmer. Cap, I don't know what's going on. The captain tried to calm him down. Keep calm, Harry. You're good. We're good as long as it's not a ship. It's okay. Even if it's a buoy, we'll just knock the thing out of the way. Ain't that right, Harry? Yeah, Cap, that's right. I think I see the sun peeking out from the clouds, so that should be a good sign, right? As Harry spoke, we could see the light he was talking about, but it wasn't the sun. It was a large, wide beam of light aimed directly at Harry. It kept getting brighter and brighter and brighter until we could not bear to keep our eyes open anymore. Harry attempted to contact us one more time, but his voice was quickly drowned out by static. The blinding light and deafening static went on for a few more seconds. A gruelingly long few more seconds. Then both the light and static disappeared at once. Before my eyes could even adjust back to the dim dark lightings of the bridge, the captain was already blindly reaching out to grab the radio. He desperately tried to hail Harry to see if he was okay, but Harry was not answering. He ordered me to grab my life jacket and get my butt down there to see what was going on. I sprinted as fast as I could, barely even getting my life vest on as I ran a small marathon to the front of the ship. When I reached the destination, my heart was pounding out of my chest from both anxiety and exhaustion. As I tried to catch my breath, I realized Harry was nowhere in sight. I instinctively grabbed my radio and yelled, "Man overboard." Almost as soon as I said it, I could feel the massive vessel start to make a drastic change in course. We hailed any and all nearby vessels for assistance. Thanks to the search for whoever owned that sailboat, there were already a decent amount of naval and Coast Guard vessels in the area, but even with all their resources, we couldn't find a single sign of Harry. We spent 8 hours looking for him. Eventually, the captain had to make the call no one wanted to make. We had to start making way to Japan. The longer we spent searching, the more fuel we'd burn, and if we burnt enough fuel, we'd never make it. Our only solace was that the Coast Guard would keep searching and hopefully we'd get some good news by the time we finished our journey. Unfortunately, that good news never came. Eventually the Coast Guard too had to call off their search. The aftermath was brutal. His family was torn apart. I was torn apart. His family is still holding out hope that he'll be found. They refuse to hold a funeral until they know for sure. I was not so hopeful. At least not at first. Even in the modern day, dying at sea is all too common. Once someone is in the water, it is a Herculean task to find them, especially with the restricted visibility that the fog had cursed us with. But it was a long way back from Japan, and I had a lot of time to think. We didn't have a single strange occurrence during the entire voyage back, which only made what we encountered on the way to Japan all the more peculiar. It was all just too strange, too much of a coincidence. The lights, the whale, the radar, the radio, the abandoned ship, and Harry. It all has to be connected. Harry didn't fall overboard. Something took him, but I don't know what. Ropins? Ghost? I just know that my friend didn't fall overboard. He's still out there somewhere. Somehow.